Hello to everybody who's here. I'm Catherine Hofstetter, and I am the Director of Development here at the Refuge Center for Counseling in Franklin. I'm also a marriage and family therapist, and we're excited to see your faces and your phone numbers today. Some of you joined us in July. We did our first quarterly church Zoom event where we really are just looking to come alongside you guys however we can. Obviously, we found ourselves in very challenging times with the pandemic and all the repercussions of that. So the Refuge Center is a Christ-centered counseling agency, and so we really want to come alongside our local church friends and partners and try to be a resource and encouragement to you as much as we can, and vice versa. So thank you for being here. I'll just give a quick Refuge overview, and then we'll jump in to hearing from some of our therapists today. So for those of you who are new to Refuge, our mission is pretty simple. It's just to offer affordable professional counseling services in order to empower and educate children, families, and individuals in need of support. So we really want to alleviate the financial barrier to getting emotional and mental health support. And as you guys know, now more than ever, the demand for mental health support and professional counseling is really growing even more than ever. We've all experienced a lot of new pressures. So I can only imagine what you all are, navigating in your church spheres. So know that we are here and we want to be an advocate and resource for you all. This whole time will be recorded so that you can share it, listen to it again, send it on to your teams, all that. Lisa Martin will follow up with that from here. And I just encourage you to jot down questions as the event goes on, because we will open it up for Q&A at the end. And for those of you who can stay, we'll converse, we'll go back and forth. And for those who need to get off right at 2 o'clock, please do, and feel free to send questions or continue the conversation later. We're happy to do that and be flexible there, but want to answer any questions that do come up. So we have 4 of our Refuge Center therapists sharing today, sharing on different topics that they're experiencing in the counseling room right now, and then that they happen to have a personal niche or expertise in. So we hope that you'll gain some encouragement, maybe some practical tools to apply in your own communities, and specifically at your churches as you're just facing so many different needs at this time. So I also do just say that if any of you would be interested in visiting our facility, we welcome that. We do connections lunches 2 times a month on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday. And we're obviously taking all the precautions here so we can do that very safely, and are happy to give you a tour of the counseling center and facility anytime for a connections lunch. So we'll send you the link to that as well. But enough from me. I'm excited for you guys to hear from some of our incredible talent and therapists who are on the front lines of the mental health needs in our community. And so we're going to let Joel Guinness kick this off. Joel, I'll let you take it from here, and I'll have each therapist just introduce themselves. And again, please do record questions so we can talk about that at the end.
Okay,
Joel,
well,
you're up.
All right, you guys can all hear me. It's good to be together with you. As Catherine said, my name is Joel Guinness, and I'm just wrapping up my year-long internship at the Refuge Center. In my other job, I'm a marriage pastor at a church in Brentwood, Tennessee called Fellowship Bible Church. I'm going to share my screen here because I've got a slideshow that I want to show as I talk about marriage and the impact of COVID on marriages. So there we go. Does that work for everyone? Okay. It is fitting that I'm talking about marriage today because today my wife and I are celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary. So you guys all have the honor of being a part of our special day. So thank you for that.
Congrats.
Well, thank you. Well, married couples and families have had to endure a lot over the past 5 months, as you guys all know, and some have weathered that storm well and some have not. I came up with 4 categories of married couples that you might encounter in your own church or ministry. And there are obviously way more than this and likely some overlap with them all. But these are 4 seasons of life that couples find themselves in during this unique period in history. And I want to go through them briefly. So they are, couples might be blessed, might be stressed, grieving, and lonely. Again, these are very fluid categories. Many couples have experienced all of these at some point in time. Maybe you have experienced all of these at some point in time. But these are intended just to raise our awareness of how COVID has impacted married couples and families. So let me talk about the blessed couple. You know, this is a couple where COVID has in many ways been a blessing in disguise. And one of the blessings may be that they have just been able to spend more time together as a couple or as a family. I know back during the 2-month quarantine period, come 4 p.m., our family would often go together on, go on a walk together and just enjoy time together that we normally wouldn't have done if they were involved in after-school activities and sports. Another blessing of COVID is that it has led to many couples working together as a team. It's brought them closer as they've tackled this incredible challenge together. So they've really developed resilience as a couple. So this is a wonderful byproduct of COVID, maybe only one of the few wonderful byproducts of COVID on couples and families. Well, let's take a look at the stressed couple. Why would a couple be stressed or anxious? Well, I know it's obvious, but let me list a couple things. Job loss, loss of income, parents working from home and maybe not as productive as they'd like to be, kids stuck at home doing school online, the fear of getting COVID, maybe actually getting COVID and seeing a loved one get COVID and sick. These are not easy circumstances to navigate. And it could be that some couples were barely hanging in there prior to COVID and now COVID has exposed these cracks in their foundation, in their relationship, and really heightened their level of stress. Next, we have the grieving couple. These couples are grieving the loss of what life used to look like. And they're grieving the loss of what the future potentially holds and what's not going to happen in the future, what they're going to miss because of COVID. Parents are grieving that their kids are not going to have a normal school experience this year, or maybe this fall at least. Parents with kids who just graduated from high school are grieving that they didn't have a typical graduation experience. And couples are being furloughed or terminated at work. And so there's a lot that people are processing and experiencing. Well, lastly, we have the lonely couple. There are many couples who are lonely during this season. And one of the biggest complaints of couples that come to counseling is there's a lack of emotional closeness or connection. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But again, COVID has in some cases really exposed this missing piece of their relationship. Despite the fact that many couples are actually spending more time together in theory, some are still so lonely because they're not having meaningful interactions with their spouse. They're not feeling heard or understood or appreciated, and that leads to deep loneliness. Now, if you look at the cartoon on the slide here, you've got the husband who's on his phone in bed, and the wife is looking on and she's not happy. In fact, she's probably angry. The interesting thing about anger in relationships is often anger is a secondary emotion, which means that underneath the anger, there's a primary emotion. So the secondary emotion is disguising the primary emotion underneath. Now, using this cartoon as the example and extrapolating a bit, because it is a cartoon, and we don't know much about this couple, the husband is ignoring his wife and she's getting angry, but deep down, she's probably lonely and longing for her husband to connect with her and show her that she's important to him. So sadness and loneliness are perhaps her primary emotions, but it's coming out as anger, her secondary emotion. And it's coming out as anger because she doesn't know how else to get his attention. She's tried, and in an attempt to get some sort of reaction out of him, she lashes out and says some unkind things. And in response, the husband retreats emotionally, maybe physically as well, even further, because how can you connect with someone that wants to take your head off? So I realize I'm reading a lot into this one cartoon drawing, but what I just described to you in terms of this pursue withdraw cycle is really very common in marriages. Well, what are couples looking for? So these are some of the struggles that they're experiencing: stress, grief, and loneliness, maybe all three at the same time. But what do they really long from one another? And if we can understand that, then we know as caretakers how we can best help them. Well, hurting couples need a lot of things. Of supreme importance, of course, is our relationship with God and a biblical understanding of marriage, which is to mirror God's covenant love to one another. So that's the first and foremost thing. But on a relational intimacy level, and in terms of fulfilling their God-given longings to attach and bond, couples desire emotional connection. And research has really confirmed this. But God designed us to have deep connection with himself. And since we're made in his image, it means that we long for deep connection in the relationship that most closely resembles our relationship with God, and that's going to be with our spouse. What is emotional connection? Well, there's lots to say about that. I'm going to point out a few things, and there's some slightly different nuances for husbands and wives and how they would describe it. But basically, when a couple achieves emotional connection, it's going to look like the following. They're going to be known and understood. They're going to feel respected and cherished. They're going to feel safe and secure in the relationship. And they're going to feel comforted and close, even in the chaos. Emotional connection is what couples are starving for. And that was true before COVID, but it's definitely true now. And I think COVID has created this heightened longing in couples to be close and connected. Amidst all this uncertainty, couples want to know that their spouse is there for them and that they're committed to getting through this together. Right before couples have a big argument and spiral into a negative cycle of interaction, couples usually have a choice. They can articulate their need and desire in the moment, which is really hard to do, and they can move towards one another in mutual compassion, or they can let their hurt turn to anger and become spiteful towards one another, which often happens. So emotional connection is easy on paper, but it's actually much harder in reality. Well, what can we do as leaders and caretakers to help these couples in distress? Firstly, we can encourage couples to go to where the help is. It's a phrase that we use often in our family. When we're hurting and we need help, it's okay, go to where the help is. And so if we can encourage that in these couples, that would be really, really helpful. And that could be seeing a pastor, a mentor couple, or a therapist. There's a counseling modality or a counseling model called emotionally focused therapy, EFT for short. And a therapist trained in EFT can really help a couple break new ground in this area. All right, secondly, we can encourage couples to get connected in community with others. And you guys know this already, I know, but that's going to church, being a part of a small group, meeting one-on-one with other couples. COVID has made it difficult for couples to do this, but it's important for couples to find a way to not be isolated. Isolation is a relationship killer. And so to find a way to interact with another couple and be reminded that they're not alone, and that they have each other's backs. Well, lastly, we can encourage couples to learn about emotional connection by reading a great book by Sue Johnson and Kenny Sandifer called Created for Connection. This book walks couples through the EFT, the emotionally focused therapy model, and will show them how to have the kind of close relationship with that God designed them to have. I use this book all the time in my counseling sessions with couples, but it certainly can be used by a couple outside of counseling and can really benefit them as well. So there's many other ways that we can help, but here's three that I came up with. Thank you guys for building into marriages and being aware of the hurt in marriages in your body or in your ministry, because marriages are hurting and we need to be there for them and help them the best we can. So hopefully this helped you guys a little bit. It sounds like questions are coming after at the end, so I will not say, let's do questions now. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Joel. I think it's my turn, right, Catherine? Okay.
Right. Thank you, Joel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Burton. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If not, let me know. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with the Refuge Center and in private practice. And today, my purpose really is to encourage you in holding space for people's grief and loss, and specifically their emotion of sadness, which I appreciate Joel reflecting that that's sometimes presents as agitation and anger and frustration. But today, before we jump into the content, I'd really like to share a clip. I hope it works, from one of my favorite movies, Inside Out, and that will kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about. So let me try to share my screen. We'll go right here.
The stuffed animal hall of fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon.
Oh no. Oh man. Catherine? Should I let that play?
Can you exit out of the ad yet? Just when it lets you exit out of the ad,
Mute it.
and it will probably continue.
Yeah, at least I can mute it. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it looks
Is it
like it just
playing?
hit you with an ad in the middle, but here it comes again. Yep.
It's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey, there's the train.
Okay, hopefully that worked for all of you. Let me stop this and come back. So, it's natural for us to want to avoid pain. And as we see here, Joy is on a mission. She would much rather rationalize, problem solve, use laughter, distraction, and humor, look for the silver lining to get Bing Bong's attitude up and to get moving on to what she had planned for them next. And the problem with those defaults of avoidance is that our sadness stays stuck. And so we saw Bing Bong is not moving for her. He's stuck. And that's when sadness becomes depression or anxiety. As you might know, depression and anxiety are not emotions. They're a result of unresolved emotions. And so when sadness came and sat down and she was able to hold space for him, it was just a few brief moments of honoring the loss and allowing for this really big emotion. And then he was able to function and move forward. And he had clarity about the right direction to go, and things were better. And so what we're seeing in this crisis and what we know as mental health providers is that it's vital for us to attend to the sadness now, so that we can prevent the tragedy of COVID or of any grief or loss from becoming a trauma that leads to long-term problems. So holding space for our sadness helps us transition to change, even unwanted and unexpected change. And it can be the bridge that allows us to say goodbye to an old reality and adapt to a new. Um, and so the difference between sadness and depression, I think, is important to note. It's that depression is an emotional flattening where we feel stuck, where sadness allows us to embrace our emotions and really commit to feeling them and working through them. And so there's a lot more movement, and the sadness is actually the key that gets you out of depression often, allowing yourself to feel it. So two things I want to focus on today. Sadness as a core emotion. We'll start there. And some of you might be familiar with Chip Dodd's book, The Voice of the Heart. And he writes, if you wish to experience life to the fullest, your heart requires that you be willing to feel sadness. He describes sadness as the feeling that speaks to how much you value what is missed, what is gone, and what is lost. It also speaks to how deeply you value what you love, what you have, and what you live for. We saw Bing Bong reflect on the memories he had with Riley, the main character, and how the object, the rocket that he lost, had represented those memories for him. And just considering even what Joel shared earlier, what we've lost in this crisis and in this pandemic. And so might be loss of family members, illness that's impacted their lives, loss of change of one's employment or financial security, the way that we celebrate weddings and graduations and life transition, our social connectedness, the way our kids are educated and our teachers are teaching, the role of the parents' involvement in the children's lives, sports, traveling, the list could go on. And so pausing to consider what's missing and really naming it for people, I think, is the first step of moving through our sadness and not allowing it to become a trauma. And it points us to what we value and honor in life. And I'm going to move into what does it mean to hold space, that phrase. And the first step, like I shared, is being able to grieve what we've lost, to name it without trying to fix it. Dr. Dan Siegel states that if we can name it, we can tame it. And it's good and right for us to sit with someone and name and just reflect back to them what they're feeling without trying to offer solutions or fix it. It's okay for us to not have answers. And I think that's a really big relief for people who are working in a helping profession, like all of us are, like, it's just to relieve yourself from, you don't have to have the answers. The second step after you've acknowledged the grief is to work through the loss by integration and acceptance of this, by finding meaning and value. So people want to hear, I'm here for you. God is with you in this. This isn't forever. What do you need? What are you learning? What gives you hope in the midst of this grief? And really the last step is repeating 1 and 2 and having patience and gentleness, because it's really hard to sit with someone in their pain. It requires us to tap into our own pain. And we have a responsibility in the roles that we're in to model steadiness and security and safety in our interactions. And we can be honest in holding the space for raw emotions that are hard, and yet maintain our hope in Christ and know that we don't grieve without hope. So the second thing, because kind of some practical tips that I wanted to offer you in supporting your congregation are just tools for conversation. So questions you might consider asking. We might be able to send these out after if you guys want a copy of them. But how to dialogue around sadness. So some ideas might be, what do you carry sadness for? What wound in your life has been unable to be healed because of sadness you aren't feeling? So like if you're avoiding the sadness, what's not being resolved? What have you been dreaming of doing in life that you haven't risked because the fear you might lose? What sadness in your life are you fighting against? What is your sadness teaching you about what you love and value in life? And how can you honor the loss or the emotion of sadness? There's a therapeutic model called interpersonal therapy, or IPT for short, and it really asks 3 core questions when people go through an identity change or a loss in life. And those questions are as simple as, what have I lost? Who am I now? And what do I need to move forward? So just some questions for dialogue and holding space and not feeling like you have to have answers or fix it. And then the second tool that I'll leave you with comes from Walter Brueggemann's book, Praying the Psalms. And I'm sure some of you are probably very familiar with this, but it's this idea that the Psalms are a gift to us that we can use and practice. And so this might be a tool that you do in a meeting with someone or that you send them out of your office with, but it's really allowing for them to use the Psalms as a model for how to pray or connect with themselves or God, or to have conversation. It's really hard to identify our sadness and sometimes even harder to put words to it, but the Psalms is a great tool for us to do that. And so let's see here. I wanted to share, Walter writes, the Psalms present human persons in situations of regression when they are most vulnerable and hurt. And the fallout of COVID is that we are more vulnerable and hurt than ever. We're feeling really big feelings, and many of us are feeling things every day that we didn't normally feel this strongly or frequently. And the Psalms are the prayers of the people who are fully present to the rawness of their emotions and the diversity of their emotions. And so in this sense, we can use that as a model and as a guide. And it's really simple. Steps for writing your own psalm really have 3 key elements. It's an intimate address, a call out to God, like a recognition of the relationship you have with Him. Complaint is step 2, telling God how troubled you are. What is the grief? What is the sadness? And then a petition or a request for God's rescue, help, or support in the midst of what you're facing. And I would add that we often see in the Psalms, they're recounting and recalling and remembering and declaring the faithfulness of God in the past. And brain science has shown us that when we practice gratitude in any form or fashion, that it activates 2 really crucial neurotransmitters that increase our joy and give us energy. And so I think ending with some type of gratitude or declaration of what you believe in the promises can be really good to help people regulate and transition out of your office or out of a conversation. And so that's really all I have. I thank you all for listening, and I'm going to pass this to Kevin, I believe.
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kevin Verdon. I'm a master's level intern at the Refuge Center. And this year, both in my personal relationships and in meeting people at the Refuge Center, I'm seeing a lot of people that come in with anxiety. They're experiencing anxiety like they never have before, and they want to know what it is, and they want to know, what they can do about it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. What is anxiety? What isn't it? And what can people do with their anxiety? And how can we help those that we're meeting with that are feeling anxious? So what is anxiety? First, let's look at the difference between anxiety and fear. Those are often put together, but they're very different. It's been said that while emotions are not always pleasant, they're always good. They actually have a function. And fear is one of those emotions. Fear is actually a primary emotion. It's been discussed in the last 2 talks about primary versus secondary. Anxiety is different. Anxiety is a secondary emotion. So here's kind of how you tell a difference. Imagine something happens, anything, and suddenly you're feeling an emotion, and it's strong. It's the first reaction to what has happened. That's a primary emotion. Primary emotions are the body's first response, and they're usually very easy to identify because they're very, very strong. They're very much the instinctual, primal survival response. Secondary emotions are much more complex because they often refer to the feelings you have about the primary emotion. And these are the learned emotions we get from our primary caregivers growing up. An easy way to identify an emotion as secondary is if the emotion lingers long after the event has happened, or even affects new but similar or connected events. Another way fear and anxiety are different is that one is real and one is imagined. Fear is actually communicating a real danger. It's specific, it's observable, and anxiety is imagined danger. It's much more diffuse, it's unfocused, it doesn't really have an object, and usually it's more future oriented. So another way to say it is that anxiety is actually imagined fear. This book, obviously we like Chip Dodd, so I'm going to bring in the voice of the heart again. He clarifies this further by saying that anxiety is impaired fear. So he calls anxiety impaired fear. And that in a healthy state, fear makes us face ourselves and reveals our neediness. But in its unhealthy state, fear says that we'll be found out as we really are, as creatures of need who believe our needs won't be met, or that neediness equals rejection. And when we don't allow our vulnerability and neediness to have their voice, we only hear how much we fear failure, and we begin to believe that we must solve our fear through self-sufficiency and control. And that's when we begin to experience anxiety in our lives. Certainly this year of the pandemic, there are real dangers. There's, fears needed. But there may be some dangers that we're experiencing that are much more imagined. And it's helpful to know the difference. Just last week, I was on a flight from Nashville to Phoenix to visit family. And the flight had been smooth and the skies had been clear. And all of a sudden, the plane jerked really hard. And I suddenly felt alert and prepared for the next jolt. I felt fear. Would the plane continue to bounce around? Was my life insurance up to date? Would my wife be okay? And then after a while, I realized the turbulence was gone and I began to breathe. I actually thought about fear and anxiety on that flight. I said to myself, okay, fear, thank you for doing your job. Everything's okay now. And any lingering anxious feelings just drifted away. I'm going to show you a visual of how this process works. Can everybody see that slide? So what happens is, as I mentioned before, when something happens and we feel threatened in some way, we get activated and we move from our calm state to a more anxious state. And if we're tuned into our healthy fear, that fear feeling, and detect the real danger, once we prepared for it, we can settle back down to that calm space, that calm place that we were in. But if the danger is more unclear or unfocused, not in the present, our imagination gets the best of us and we get stuck in that anxiety place. One thing you'll notice too, that the more anxious we get, the less aware we are. So we're aware down in this calm state, but as we get anxious, we're less aware of the present and what's going on. So here's a few tips that have helped me with others navigate their feelings of anxiety. So tip number one is to externalize it. So literally you try to visualize yourself away from and make space. Elizabeth talked about this, between you and the anxiety. And anxiety can sometimes trick us into thinking it's become part of us and that we can't get away. And when this happens, we feel trapped. It's really interesting to listen closely to how you or the person that you're meeting with is talking about their anxiety. Calling it my anxiety is much different than calling it the anxiety. It's the difference between saying I am anxious and I feel anxious. I am anxious is a kind of limiting self-definition. I feel anxious suggests the ability to recognize and acknowledge the feeling without being consumed by it. So externalize it, make space. It's kind of like socially distancing from the anxiety, right? So tip number two, don't fight it. So don't fight the anxiety. most often anxiety is not something that any of us wants to feel. So we try to fight it, we try to control it, we might try to hide it. But when we don't feel our feelings, we're not solving anything. And when we try not to feel anxious, what usually happens is it actually intensifies that feeling. Ironically, because when we fight what we feel, the feeling gets bigger, not stronger. So we want to learn to engage with the feeling and not fight it. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is actually the answer to how we engage with it. And it's actually just getting curious about it. So once we've made space between us and the anxiety, and we've stopped trying to fight it, we're able to simply notice the feeling without being swept away by it. With curiosity, anxiety can start to feel like what I call the wandering neighbor. So here's a short story. Last year, I noticed a neighbor wandering around on our property, and I didn't know the neighbor well, but he was clearly out of place. And I figured he'll just wander off after some time, but he didn't. So I thought, well, I'll just get up and go introduce myself. So I walked up to him and I just got to know him a little bit and said, "How can I help you?" And he actually told me he had dropped something and he was looking for it. So I helped him find the thing he was looking for, and then he went on his way. So anxiety can be like that if we just get curious with it. Tip number 4 is, let me go back to my slides here. So this is a metaphor, Dan Siegel has been mentioned already, but this is a metaphor that he developed, Dr. Dan Siegel, called the river of well-being. And he uses this metaphor to illustrate the ways things like stress and anxiety can impact our relationships with ourselves, with others, and with God. And you can see in this visual, the river represents a state of well-being. It's harmony, it's flexibility, able to be adaptable, energized, etc. But as stress levels increase, we can either move to the left, so there's a bank of chaos, or to the right, this bank of rigidity. And especially on the left, this is where we feel anxiety. Things can feel out of control, and we just feel that anxiety. And Dr. Siegel teaches that the way we make our way back from either bank is helping us to practice a concept that you may have heard of, and it's called mindfulness. And this is where we get back to awareness. So mindfulness is actually a proactive way to help us use our awareness and get back to the present, which helps us calm down. Just like we talked about learning to be curious with our feeling of anxiety, mindfulness is just being curious about our entire current experience. So it's not letting anxiety take over everything. It's allowing us to experience our entire experience. And ways to experience mindfulness include using the 5 senses to notice what you're experiencing in the present. So things like, what do you taste? And that sense of taste and touch and seeing and smelling and hearing. Another tool that you can use for mindfulness is to notice what you're sensing in your body as you experience those 5 senses around you. And another simple practice is to use your breath, to focus on your breath and think about things like, does the length of my inhale match the length of my exhale? Am I breathing deeply or in a more shallow manner? That kind of thing. So mindfulness is a tool that can help us improve our awareness and help us get back down to that calm state. A last item is, as we're more aware of our own situation and our anxieties is more regulated, we can actually help others through what I call connecting conversation. So we can help others externalize. We can help others not fight their anxiety. We can help others do these things by simply integrating into the conversation and weaving in some of these concepts as we're talking to people. For example, Say you're talking to a friend who seems stuck in an anxious place and they keep talking about it as my anxiety. You can say something like, where do you think the anxiety came from? How long do you think that anxiety has been visiting? That can kind of help them recognize that it's not really part of them. Or let's say you're talking to someone who doesn't seem to want to go below the surface and want to really experience what's going on inside of them. You could take the lead and you can offer up, wow, what a year. I don't know about you, but I can't remember a time where I felt more out of control and I felt anxiety like I never had before. What about you? How are you handling all this? So just kind of modeling vulnerability can help people open up and be vulnerable themselves. It's a really powerful way to help them experience what's going on inside. So just to kind of review some of those tips: externalize anxiety, number one. Don't fight it. Get curious about it. Use your awareness and help others. So I hope that was helpful on the anxiety topic. And I can't remember who's next.
It's Michelle. Michelle, you're on mute, but then you can go on.
Yeah, I have finally got myself unmuted. Thank you, Kevin. I'm Michelle Conkle, and it's a privilege to share with you today some interesting information on being present to self and others during uncertainty. So my colleagues that have gone before me just now have touched on several things that I'm gonna reiterate. But I wanted to start with the definition of uncertainty. Uncertainty is defined as not able to be relied on, not definite, something that is doubtful or unknown. Other words associated with uncertainty are distrust, reservation, skepticism, suspicion, unsettled, unresolved, unsure, pending, and in the balance. So it's no doubt that many of us and those around us have experienced these words in recent months, these feelings. The word present, as several people have mentioned already on this call, is a noun that means a period of time that is now occurring. It also means in a particular place. So how do I be more present? If you're living in the past, there's going to be depression. If we're living too much in the future, there's going to be anxiety. So really, the present moment is all we really have. And that's where the gold is in the moment. And that's also where the happiness is. So I would like for you, each of us on this call, to notice right now how we are present in this moment. Notice, for instance, your breath. Press your feet into the floor. Feel the weight of yourself in the chair you may be sitting in. Notice the quality of being in the present moment right now, without worry of the next thing. At some point today, when you engage in a simple act like washing your hands, practice being fully present to that. Feel the soap on your hands. Smell the soap. Feel the water and how it touches your skin, without the thought of what's next. Use these simple practices like washing your hands every day to be present to yourself for just a few minutes. Even a few seconds can shift our behavior and our mindset. In the midst of many challenges and uncertainties, meditation is also a practice that can help us increase awareness of the present moment. Meditation is defined as the concentrated focus upon a sound, object, visualization, breath, or movement in order to reduce stress, promote relaxation, and enhance personal and spiritual growth. Several mindfulness resources have been mentioned here, and we also have some good ones on our Refuge website. And I'm sure Catherine will be sending out some other resources from this talk today that will be good mindfulness practices. The words, "Don't let the past steal your present," have been quoted by Claude Dennis, and I would add to that by saying, don't let the past or the future steal your present. 50% of our time is spent outside the present moment, not thinking about what we are doing, but ruminating about chatter that is not always productive in our minds. Most of that is about negative future outcomes. Some of it is about something in the past. And we find ourselves lost in this mental chatter that is not productive or useful for our growth. Even using the small things in our daily routines to intentionally focus on the present, like washing our hands, can help us begin to shift this mindset and spend more time in the present. I want to talk for just a minute about curiosity versus fear. And Kevin really touched very some of the content that I'm going to share too. But curiosity is an of being present to self and others. To be curious means to be open to knowing what is transpiring in any given moment. Transpire is a Latin word that means both through and breathe. So the word transpire literally means to breathe through. If we breathe through moments by being present, we engage our curiosity. This is important in our relationships with self and others. Therapist Pamela Reed says, anxiety is a reaction we have when we believe harm is imminent. So how do we disarm it? When we begin to feel physiological sensations like tingling in our extremities, increased heart rate, difficulty breathing, and a sense of being outside of ourselves, our brain tells our body there's danger, and our bodies respond with a flood of neurochemicals, preparing us for battle. And this keeps anxiety alive within us. We disarm anxiety by asking ourselves, what is happening? What is actually happening right now? We keep the executive functioning or logical part of our brain engaged, and we decrease fear around what might happen by asking, what is happening? Keeping engaged with curiosity lessens our anxiety. When we approach our own feelings with a sense of curiosity instead of fear, we are able to regulate and become more balanced and connected to self. When we approach ourselves and the world around us with curiosity rather than fear, it breeds compassion. In a talk I recently listened to with Catherine Spearing, she stated, especially in the church, we feel a tremendous responsibility to have the right answers. When by doing so, we may miss honoring someone's hardship. Many times congregation members are looking for the right answers, much like they are when they come to our therapy offices here at Refuge. This can create pressure and stress for us, especially since we're people who want to do the right thing. We're people of faith. We want to bring peace and comfort to people's pain. However, when we are more focused on saying the right thing rather than being fully present in our listening, we may miss sitting fully with them in the unpleasant, tangled, and chaotic feelings they're experiencing. Why do we feel the need to have the right answers? Our motivations can appear competent, to meet perceived expectations, any number of reasons. To be comfortable with not having the right answer and instead being a safe place for the uncomfortable is a more valid mission for us as pastors and therapists. Listening closely to someone's words shifts our thoughts to the person's talking instead of what we are going to say next. Often, if we focus with our full presence on what someone else is saying, our response comes naturally without worry. A co-host in a podcast called Uncertain shared that she recently verbalized some heavy hurts to her pastor. He paused for about 10 seconds, and in those few seconds, she said she felt he was fully present to everything she had just said. To her, this was Jesus-like. To her, this was bearing within the midst of the tangled, cluttered, chaotic, and unpleasant mess that was going on internally for her. As has already been mentioned, this is holding space. And holding space is the way, was to her in this example, the embodiment of the presence of God. This can be very transformative, just holding space for people who need to be heard and seen. It was a means of true connection for this person in this example. Brene Brown defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. So what I would like us all to do now for just a few seconds is hold space for each other. So I'm just going to give it a 10 count, and I want to hold space for each other right now. Thank you for the work that you do. Just as a little side note here in my last minute or so, I grew up on a farm in a rural background, and I have always admired farmers and ministers because I feel like they have the hardest jobs on the face of this planet, and they are 365 days a year. So thank you for the tireless efforts that you put into what you do, and I hope this time here today has been refreshing to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and each of you for sharing today. I'll open it up and just say, for anyone who would like to ask some questions, please feel free or send it in the group chat. And Kevin, Elizabeth, Michelle, and Joel are happy to tackle something if there's a specific need or something going on that you'd like to ask about. So please go ahead and do so at this time, or feel free to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you and your congregation. And then for those who are leaving, we will follow up with materials. So thank you so much. Again, like Michelle said, we're so thankful for your ministry, and I'm grateful to partner alongside each other in these crazy days. Any questions? And you can just unmute yourself and insert where you'd like.
Are you guys finding that there's a number one concern people are dealing with? It sure sounds like anxiety is the one right now.
That's the one for me. Every single person that comes in, anxiety is a part of the soup that they're dealing with. Absolutely. Just that feeling of loss of control and chaos, and which is understandable.
I think anxiety would definitely be first, depression also. I think the grief of some of the loss around this pandemic has triggered past grief also. So it kind of brings some things to the surface that have maybe been in the background. So yeah, we definitely are seeing a trend of anxiety and depression.
And as Joel talked about, the impact on all those things on relationships, be it married relationships or family relationships, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And the desire for connection because of so much closure, you know, and all of the restrictions that we have in human connection. So many people are dealing with loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Just any conversation, any personal connection is what people say that they're needing.
I wonder, so you all service, you know, not only just people in our community, but a lot of our parishioners eventually find themselves into one of your counseling rooms. And I wonder if in your practice that you ever have the thought, I sure do wish the church would do this, or I sure do wish the church would address this.
Mm. I hear a lot of clients tell me how beneficial it is in their churches to have small groups. And I'm talking small groups. I know for myself, not only just my clients have said this, but for myself, I have a group, there's 3 of us who are committed to 1 hour a week, whether it's Zoom or phone, or it hardly ever is in person, unfortunately, because we live far apart. But we study the same devotion every day, and then we get together once a week just to talk about it and pray for each other and hold each other accountable. And, you know, for you as ministers, right now, that has been the church to me. And I feel like small groups are so important for all of our congregations right now.
I might insert, Vona, too, that just, you know, being open to emotional and mental health struggles. And some churches are really wonderful at that, you know, and some are still learning. And so wanting to really, the church to be a safe place to bring those forward too. And so the church feels comfortable to say, okay, this is sort of where my role ends and where a mental health professional might come in. So yeah, just talking about it to destigmatize any of that, spiritually speaking, you know, because there can be a lot of shame and guilt around struggling, and people can tie that into their spirituality so much, you know.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Catherine, because I was thinking just about the like worry and anxiety as a sin versus like chemical imbalances in the brain. So I think that discussion, just holding space for that without judgment. And I meant to say earlier in my talk that the theme, the overarching theme of asking those questions or having the discussions is to have curiosity over judgment. And Michelle, you did that, but just to be curious rather than rush to judgment or assuming that we know what's going on with someone. Or trauma responses, not just chemical imbalances. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the way I worded that. Could be a trauma response.
That's interesting, Elizabeth, because the sort of follow-up thought I had about the anxiety question was, are you guys seeing any amplification of other things because of the anxiety? What's the intersection of some of the various things folks are dealing with? And is some of it flaring up more because, for instance, anxiety seems to be so high now? And is there anything we can do other than helping people recognize that?
Well, the first thing I think of, I think somebody mentioned this, the notion of name entertainment. So just talking about anxiety, one thing that our church did during the shutdown that I thought was very helpful. Joel and I attend the same church, but literally all the staff members of the church got a list of, say, 20 church members and made reach out calls and had specific questions to get to. It was, what are you thinking about all this? What are you feeling about all this? So inviting them to access what's under deep down, and then, what are you hoping for down the road? And then, can I pray for you? And I made 20 of those phone calls, and I have to say that initially I wondered, will people want to engage? Will people want to even go there? They don't even know who I am. And what I found was people were thirsty for exploring their own emotions and to be prayed for. And so those kinds of things, I think, can really help people get more integrated. We get disconnected when we get anxious, we get more fragmented, we lose the parts of ourselves. And so just having those conversations and talking about how we're feeling, and then you don't feel alone. But certainly, as you mentioned, Brian, the anxiety can lead to all kinds of other unhealthy coping mechanisms, definitely.
And Brian, one thing I'll say too that I've found with clients here that has helped is many people are so disoriented through this whole disruption and chaos that they have forgotten what their self-care is and what their interests are, what their passions are. They've forgotten all that because they're in survival mode. And I think as we connect, if we can help them connect back to themselves, to true self, to what they love, what brings them passion, what brings them joy, I think that they're able to better handle anxiety in a healthy way. I think we have to remind them what the healthy coping mechanisms are for them.
Brian, the only thing I'll add to that is, anxiety and any mental health challenge never happens in a vacuum. It's always in the context of a relationship or a friendship of some kind. And so it is always going to affect somebody else in addition to themselves. And so that can make it hard in a relationship where one partner doesn't understand why the other person is feeling so anxious. But again, that's where the emotional connection comes in. They can get to that point where they really understand and are able to communicate compassion to their partner, and really bring each other, soothe each other and bring a lot of healing to something like anxiety. So if you're doing that with a partner, it can be a beautiful thing. But again, they have to be open and honest and vulnerable, and then the other person has to move towards them and comfort them.
Thanks to you all.
I will add one more thing. There's a quote that I didn't list on holding space and feeling the emotion or talking about the emotion or naming it. And it was by the Walter Brigham man who wrote the book, Praying the Psalms. He said, once the psalmist pours out their anger, their sadness, their protest, the pain moves to a positive resolution. It's not at all clear what happens to permit such a change, but it's clear that the change happens, and the pattern is often lament. And in the end, the writer is in a very different place. And so just validating, I think just naming it and being with it is effective, I would hope.
I have one thing to add too. I didn't say anything about premarital couples, but life is different for them too. The dream wedding that they wanted to have, is not happening right now. And so, some couples are just happy to get married, period. But some, especially the women, may be grieving the fact that this wedding wasn't their dream wedding and it didn't look like what they hoped. They didn't have the people there that they wanted. And so just to be aware of that, if you know any newly married couples or soon to be married couples that are wrestling with that, that's a real loss for some of them. I did a wedding back in April, and it was really cold. It was outdoors, it was freezing, and it was super windy. And the bride is looking at me shivering, saying her vows, and I just thought, oh my goodness, poor girl, she's not going to be satisfied with this wedding. And sure enough, I got an email from them recently saying, hey, Joel, we're doing a reaffirmation of our vows in next month. Are you available for it? So I'm not surprised. So a lot of people are doing that. They're having a second celebration, either officially like kind of another ceremony or just a gathering. So just to be aware of that there's some loss and grief even for engaged or newly married couples.
Well, thanks, guys. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wants to share?
Thank you all for doing this. Really awesome.
Very
Thank
helpful.
you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah. And honestly, we just want to come alongside you guys however we can. So feel free to reach out anytime. We are committed to our local churches and just thankful for all you do. And we'll certainly be in touch, and we'll do another one. We're going to be doing these quarterly. And so we'll keep you posted on the next one. And if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful rest of the day and week, and we will be in touch. Thank you all to our therapists as well.
Thank you.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.